Welcome. This is Culture Makers. I'm your host, Josh Wilson, and the date is September 4th, 2021. Our world is plunging through an incredible and rapid rate through a most amazing period of social and spiritual enlightenment. Did you miss it? Back in 1935, it was written that our Earth is now quivering on the very brink of one of its most amazing and enthralling epics of social readjustment, moral quickening, and spiritual enlightenment. Now, 80-some years later, I can say we're not just quivering on the brink, but we are now plunging through this amazing and enthralling epic. Dear friends, we might have missed it, looking at the nightly news and glued to our cell phones, but while we were parsing sacred texts in our debating societies, some amazing things happened in our world. Actually, most of us have contributed to this striking progress through our life's work. Thank you. The predictions of doomsayers caught in the web of calling out our oppressors and describing others as the oppressed could not have been more wrong. I mean, like flat earth wrong. Progress, the watchword or rallying cry of the universe, has gone forward beyond what United Nations planners and even the most optimistic among us could have imagined. Most of what I'll be sharing has to do with the rapid rate of change and improvement in virtually all areas, especially since 1920 to now, in other words, in a 100-year period. The areas of progress in this essay are outlined in the following groups: length of life and nutrition, religion and spirituality, wealth, population and environment, war and peace, safety, democracy and equal rights, knowledge, and quality of life. We'll start with length of life and nutrition. Now, I'll be quoting or citing where these statistics come from a little bit later. And I know that many of these will sound shocking or even hard to believe, but I will give the sources for every one of these details. In length of life and nutrition, we find that the worldwide average for length of life has increased from 35 years in 1920 to 70 years today. That's doubling in 100 years. Life expectancy in the UK has risen from 50 years in 1920 to 80 years for someone born in 2013. The percentage of children dying before age 5 in Sweden, Canada, South Korea, Chile, and Ethiopia fell from between 10 and 40% in 1920 to less than 1% in 2015. The caloric intake for individuals in China, similar to other world increases, climbed from 1,500 calories per day in 1950 to 3,000 calories per day in 2013. The percentage of stunted children under age 5 in Bangladesh dropped from 70% in 1990 to 38% of children in 2014. In China, it has dropped to less than 10%. The percentage of undernourished persons in the developing world dropped from 35% in 1970 to 12% in the year 2015. The next area we'll look at and find some more surprises is in religion and spirituality. Increases in democracy and freedom have created a climate for religious growth, including for new groups such as the Nones, that's spelled N-O-N-E-S, who state no denominational affiliation. The growth in Christianity has been most notable in China and South Korea, and the resurgence of Orthodox Christianity in Russia. The mores and outlooks of all the major world religions are undergoing rapid change. Christian population growth of the global Christian community, according to a 2011 Pew Research Center survey, says there were 2.19 billion Christians around the world in 2010, more than 3 times as much from the 600 million recorded in 1910. This rate of growth in some sectors is slower than the overall population growth over the same time period. However, from 1960 to 2000, the global growth of the number of reported evangelical Protestants grew at 3 times the world's population rate and twice that of Islam. As I said, I will be sharing all the sources for these facts and figures. That particular one came from Wikipedia, which you can find under Christian population growth. Like Mark Twain once reported to a newspaper, the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Wealth is the next area. The gross domestic product, GDP per capita worldwide, grew from barely measurable in 1850 to $15,000 annually in 2015. About 1 billion people, or most of the world's population, lived in extreme poverty by current standards in 1820. Today, about 7 billion people are not living in extreme poverty, and about 1/2 billion, unfortunately, still live in extreme poverty. The improvement has exceeded United Nations targets and is ahead of schedule. International inequality declined from 0.65 on the Gini index, population weighted, in 1950 down to 0.48 in 2013, which means the poorer countries became richer faster than the rich countries became richer. Inequality on this index in the US and in the UK dropped from about 0.5 on the Gini index in 1925 to around 0.40 in 2013. Social spending on health, education, pensions, and income support grew in the developed nations from about 2% in 1920 to 22% of national wealth in 2016. In another unsung accomplishment, the poorest of the poor, the unsheltered homeless, fell in number by almost 1/3 between 2007 and 2015 in developed countries, despite the Great Recession. Population and environment is our next area. The worldwide annual growth rate of population has declined from a high in 1970 of 2.0% to 0.5% today, a reduction of 75%. Despite the increase in vehicle miles traveled, increase in GDP, and energy usage, the measure of 5 major pollutants has dropped by 50% from 1970 to 2014. As poorer countries have gotten richer in recent decades, 2 of the deadliest forms of pollution have lessened. Tainted drinking water has dropped by 5/8 worldwide, and breathing indoor cooking smoke has dropped by 1/3. Although the amount of oil shipped by sea increased from 1.5 billion metric tons in 1970 to nearly 3 billion metric tons in 2015, the number of spills decreased from a high of 115 spills to just 6 spills in that same period. The amount of land and marine protected areas grew from about 7% of land and water in 1990 to between 12 and 15% in 2014. Next, we look at war and peace. The percentage of years in which great powers fought each other reached peaks of about 100% in the 1500s and 1600s, down to 25% during World War II, and has declined to a small fraction of that in the 2000s. Warfare is as horrible as always. However, the skirmishes between national armies kill far fewer than the hundreds of thousands killed in all-out wars of preceding centuries. Battle deaths per 100,000 people of population recently peaked in 1950 at 22 battle deaths and declined to about 2 per 100,000 people of population in 2015. Genocide deaths per 100,000 of population rose from 15 in 1965 to nearly 50 in 1970 and has now dropped to near zero in 2015. Next, we'll take a look at safety. Homicide deaths annually were high in the southwest U.S. at about 100 deaths in the year 1900, 85 in New England in 1650 per 100,000 of population, but fell to about 1 death per 100,000 of population in England, Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, and down to 5 in the U.S. Southwest by the year 2005. World homicide rates dropped to 6 in the year 2010 per 100,000 of population. Deaths per 100 million vehicle miles traveled dropped from 23 deaths in 1920 to 5 in 1970 to 2 deaths per 100 million vehicle miles traveled today. The chances that a person would die as an airline passenger was 5 in a million in 1970. That risk has fallen 100-fold today. Occupational accident deaths dropped from 60 per 100,000 workers per year in 1920 to 3 deaths in 2015. Democracy and equal rights is our next area. The democracy versus autocracy score rose from -7 in 1800 to +4 in 2015. This means 2/3 of the world's population now live in a free or relatively free society, compared to less than 2/5 in 1950. Capital punishment was once everywhere among countries, applied to many misdemeanors even, as reflected in the crucifixion of Christ between 2 thieves. After the Enlightenment, European countries reformed, and Britain reduced the number of punishable capital offenses from 222 down to 4. Online searches for racist, sexist, and homophobic jokes has declined dramatically from 2004 to 2017. Rape and sexual assault reports against women fell from 800 victims per 100,000 of population in 1993 to 200 in 2014. Violence against wives and girlfriends dropped from 1,500 reported incidents per 100,000 of population in 1993 to 400 in 2013. Violent victimization of children at school fell from 900 children per 10,000 of population in 1993 to 220 children in 2012. Physical abuse of children dropped from 360 per 100,000 of population in 1993 to 150 in 2015. Sexual abuse reports of children declined from 210 per 100,000 of population in 1993 to 80 reports in 2015. Another area that has grown incredibly is the realm of knowledge. World literacy rates have climbed from a little better than 10% in 1825 to over 80% of the world in year 2000. According to current predictions, by the year 2050, only 5 countries will have a fifth of their population uneducated and no illiterate countries by the end of the century. Here's a very happy report. The ratio of literate females to literate males worldwide has risen to statistical parity of 1.0 in 2014 from 0.7 in 1975. Next, we look at quality of life. The weekly number of work hours has declined in the U.S. and Western Europe from over 60 hours in 1870 to slightly less than 40 hours in the year 2000. The percentage of men 65 and over participating in the U.S. workforce was at 76% in 1880. It is now at 24%. Housework used to require 60 hours per week in the year 1900 to keep up a U.S. household. Now only 25 hours per week are required. Almost all homes have running water, vacuum cleaner, refrigerator, washing machine, dishwasher, stove, and electricity, much different than in 1915. The cost of even 1 hour of indoor nighttime light from tallow, kerosene, oil, or any other source is most telling. The cost in the year 1400 was beyond the reach of most homes in England. Now the cost is negligible. Here are some caveats and some warnings. Friends, I've not covered everything here, like the obesity rates in Louisiana, or how solar power has killed more people than nuclear due to workmen falling off ladders and roofs. Obviously, mankind has learned much about health and safety and not enough about true happiness that comes from soul growth in relationship to God and divine purpose in life. There are some who will be unwilling to accept as true the improvements outlined in these statements because of settled opinions about how surely everything must be getting worse. They may feel sure that any notion of real progress must be an illusion. The Enlightenment principles of reason, rationality, and logos, of science, humanism, and religion have shown us that humankind can indeed think through our problems and come up with solutions. Others will not be happy to learn that the improvements did not come about because of redistribution of wealth or by eliminating the patriarchy. You are welcome to dispute any or all of the above statements, graphs, and numbers. The information comes variously from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, Historical Index of Human Development, UNESCO Institute for Statistics, Our World in Data, National Child Abuse and Neglect Data System, U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics, Google Trends, Pew Research Center, OSHA, National Safety Council, Aviation Safety Network, NHTSA, FBI Uniform Crime Reports, Human Security Report Project, World Conservation Monitoring Center, US EPA, World Health Organization, and others. References for each statistic can be found in Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now or Matt Ridley's The Rational Optimist. But be aware that not only Enlightenment principles and human ingenuity and goodwill are at work. We read from the Urantia book in paper 195, but secularism is not the sole parent of all these recent gains in the enlargement of living. Behind the gains of the 20th century are not only science and secularism, but also the unrecognized and unacknowledged spiritual workings of the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Thank you for joining me on Culture Makers. This is your host, Josh Wilson.